in Aspen, like right around the corner, from like in between Big Rap and Paradise Bakery, like on the.
Yeah.
in front, yeah, on the sidewalk.
On the
No,
sidewalk.
and you went down?
Yeah,
Oh,
Did they stop?
crazy.
it was like a 15-year-old kid, you know, and so I thought, didn't know what to do, but we didn't know what to do. Well, I was like, oh my God. I was like, and then it was a kid, I was like, oh man.
It was at AVH this morning for an appointment, but walking around and it was when all the country day kids were getting ready. All of a sudden, there was e-bikes in every direction, kids like flying. I was like, okay, I'm scared. I'm gonna, like, I'm really scared here right now.
It's anarchy. Yeah.
Do you mind putting
No,
maybe
it says they see like 12 bike wrecks a day.
Oh my goodness.
There was something like somebody was like.
I'm not plugged in, but I think I have plenty of.
Okay, as soon as Jeffrey is settled in, we can call to order.
All right, hello, everybody. It is Tuesday, the first day of October. This is the Pickens County Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting. And present we have Jeffrey, Doug, Jasmine, and myself. And before we get started, are there any commissioner comments that are not pertinent to the agenda this evening? Anyone? Staff?
I hadn't planned ahead. I don't think
I'll
just-
give you there, how's that?
What? You give me what? Give me something to say. Other than, yeah, upcoming agenda stuff.
Mhm.
I am still remiss and I know Ed and
Just
Artie
try to-
had come to you guys and asked about that code amendment that I still need to actually get in front of you. So I'm gonna be trying to slide that in on some agenda coming up. But actually, I think you just have the 15th of October. And then there's a little gap because of election day. So then I think you don't have any until the 20th.
All right, great. Bonnie, do we have any members of the public that are on right now?
No.
All right.
One commissioner comment.
Go ahead.
at a time. Hey, I invited you, we're going to Fire Adapted Colorado, I'm looking at Colorado. Fire Adapted Colorado is today and tomorrow and the next day in Viewline. So all the chiefs from throughout the state are there. We'd love to see Pitkin County there, just walk in. I know Patty's just gonna walk in. But it updates the wildfire code, community wildfire protection plan, so there should be a Pitkin County representative. It's at Viewline and Snowmass for the next 2-3 days. So even if Jeff Erickson shows up, that'll be cool. Sorry, plug for FACO, Fire Adapted Colorado.
Emergency manager now?
He's
in
in,
Nashville.
yeah, he got deployed to the hurricane.
Oh.
Oh.
We read an article this morning.
I think he's in Florida.
Wow.
All right. Well, our first item on the agenda is the Pickens County Vision 2050 project update.
Thank you, Zach. I will open here. Hannah Hunt and I are going to give you an update on work that's progressing on the Vision 2050 project, the comprehensive plan update, and feedback that we've received from the work group, the Vision 2050 work group to date. And then we're going to talk about next steps. So you all have seen this slide before, but to put everything in context, the Vision 2050 project is about implementing Board of County Commissioner goals around growth management and climate action, and ensuring that the comp plan update and subsequent code amendments adhere to the values and goals developed by the Community Growth Advisory Committee, right? As part of this process, the CGAC, as you know, has evolved into a work group with the addition of caucus representatives to informally review a comprehensive plan, proposed amendments, and recommendations by the project team. So there are 3 deliverables associated with this project, and the comprehensive plan will be the leading edge It will be updated first to lay the policy groundwork to guide energy and land use code amendments. And as you know, the Planning and Zoning Commission is the authority that will be reviewing and adopting amendments to the comprehensive plan. You will also act as the formal recommending body to the BOCC as land use code amendments come forward. So again, you've seen this slide too, but just to reiterate, the comp plan will lay the policy foundation for code amendments, but it will also play a larger role in supporting other county programs related to Board of County Commissioner goals, not necessarily related to land use policy.
Great, so we're gonna, just go through kind of here's where we are in terms of the overall roadmap. And then we'll do a dive into the existing conditions, which was presented to the work group. I think the last time we were at PNZ, we called it the steering group, but it's the same group. It's former members of the CGAC with caucus representatives. So this summer, we've been working through the existing conditions piece, which is starting with a large inventory, kind of tallying up current plans that either the county has produced or county partners have produced. That was shared with you all as kind of an inventory. There's a ton in there, and there's a lot that we've been going through, but really as kind of a basis for what current planning efforts are underway. And then a county profile, which is really this existing conditions, future trends. We'll talk through that data today. It's a little bit adjusted. There's a few kind of adjustments. Either things have been updated, and so there's new information coming, or there's a few things that I've added just since that work group meeting slide deck. So there's a little bit of new information in here. This is a subset of all the data work that we're doing and all of the kind of existing conditions from a county profile standpoint, but this is like hitting the highlights. And then there was also,
and we have a lot to go through on those data pieces, but if you have questions, go ahead and jump in and ask and we'll respond. Thanks.
and then community value surveys. This was sent out. This is really kind of testing the pulse in terms of the broader Vision 2050 community values, which is a part also of just kind of getting a gauge in terms of the community. Are we on track and in line with what we're thinking in terms of these larger kind of values as we move forward into this next phase, which is topic area groundwork, which is diving deeper into each of the plan elements, the policy areas that'll be within those. We are having a lot of discussions with different subject matter experts, making sure we're really comprehensive in terms of the planning work that the county has already done, meeting with different county staff, different departments. And then on October 30th, we are doing an open house, which will be in the afternoon. We have a kind of invite to a variety of different community members to give us feedback on specific aspects of the comp plan. We'll kind of go through that in the different plan areas. And then the evening of October 30th, it's a public, open to anybody to just share what we're doing, gauge feedback, get some additional input. So that's kind of that phase for the fall. And then as we move to the end of the fall and into next year, we'll be starting to really refine that policy direction, get into some of that with you all where there's specific areas that we may need to dive in further. And then starting in the winter, really putting plan to paper and looking at putting together drafts. And then reviewing out. And I'll just say kind of at each step, the cadence that we plan to do with you all as PNZ is that as we go through a step, first, we'll be checking in with the work group that will give us some additional feedback. We'll take that and then bring that to you all to just get kind of additional feedback, but kind of help us move as a sign off to move through these different steps. So just a note on that cadence. This is, so the county inventories we mentioned, there's, you saw that list, there's 60, 70 plans. This is just a sampling. These are plans that just were produced in 2023. So the CJC report, obviously, which is a big foundation to this. Shout out to wildfire, but the wildfire protection plan, is obviously in here, hazard mitigation plan. This is just a sampling, but just to say there's a lot that's in there. And the way that these are being incorporated into the comprehensive plan is to really elevate the policy level recommendations, especially from these plans that have been approved. Comp plan will not be rewriting the hazard mitigation plan, but instead we'll be using that as an input to carry forward that and support that policy direction. So just to kind of get a sense, but ultimately that will be, the comp plan is a place to make connections from a policy level and support that kind of broader county level policy. So I'm just gonna jump into this. I think that some of you have already seen some of the slides. If you've got a just kind of clarifying question, jump in. Otherwise, I'll just kind of run through this and we can go through. Yeah.
I can wait till we end up. So existing conditions, great that all the reports were updated in the last couple of years. But we make a lot of decisions based on the layers within our GIS tools. And the GIS tools seem to be pretty out of date. So specifically groundwaters from 2011, wildfires from 1995. And yet we're making informed decisions, land use decisions based on out of date data. So I'm cool if the report's been updated, but it's not filtering back to GIS that we're using.
From a GIS, from the Maps and More, what you're seeing on Maps and More.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
that's,
it's an overriding concern. It's like,
Mhm.
great, we're doing all this community planning, but I'm worried that the inputs that that are filtering into the decision-making tools are not coming out of the reports and going back into the ground truth of the way we actually make land use decisions.
And there's a piece of that that relates to having the code be flexible enough to accommodate the latest, greatest mapping, versus some of the language
Mhm.
doesn't quite get us there right now.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I'm just, I mean, I voice it as we're talking about existing conditions, but the existing conditions aren't appearing in our decision tools. And so I'm sort of highlighting that as a concern.
Got it. Yeah, and I think, in terms of the, from the broader standpoint of the policy direction, right? Like this is the comprehensive plan will be broad from a policy standpoint in terms of, making sure that we're using the current layers and GIS. That's kind of gets into a little more of the technical piece of how that plays out, but a good flag to know.
I'm in I mean, it's weeds, but I'm rolling the tape forward saying I'm with you. We're gonna update the comp plan
Right.
and I'm looking forward as you move to the policy direction. I've got other feedback that I think hopefully steers.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that. Good information.
Yeah. So also just to note as we go through this on sources, we are using all publicly available data. And that's an intent to make sure that we're just being clear, transparent, comprehensive in terms of what we're providing as available data. A note too on the state demography office, we work with them sometimes directly to calibrate their sources. So just in terms of kind of from a source and data standpoint, that's something that that's what we're moving forward with. And we are involved in part of that we feel good about. So the population projections, so interesting. So since 2000, Pitkin County has grown and this population, this is people, permanent residents, about 7% compared to about 35% at the state level. And as we look forward, that growth is expected to be 3.6% over the next 25 years, compared to Colorado at large is 25%. And I'll just say, this is, these are interesting numbers because it's really different than what we may feel in terms of growth intensity, but in terms of what the actual numbers are in terms of permanent residence population, that number in terms of projected population is quite small. Comparatively, I just pulled, so Eagle County over the same period projected to grow 37%, Garfield over the same period, 43%. So some pretty different, when we talk about the larger catchment area and this kind of larger region, there's definitely growth projections, but in terms of what that looks like for Pitkin County from a permanent resident, that's actually much smaller. And a lot of that's attributed to older population, fewer births, more people leaving, younger people leaving, older people remaining, and not the same replacement rate. So a lot in there, but that's kind of the big picture. And then just the breakdown of, unincorporated Pitkin County is about 6,000. Moving forward with the existing conditions, all of this is looking at Pitkin County as a whole, so inclusive of municipalities. So kind of big trends from a demographic standpoint. Population identifying as Latino has been growing, so that population from 2020 is looking at about 14%. We know that that's not fully capturing that demographic, and other sources put that closer to 30%. And the county's aging, so this is happening across Colorado and across specifically mountain rural communities.
I have a quick, how are we defining permanent resident? Like, is that registering to vote? Is that the percentage of months they live here? Like, what's the metric, or how are we defining that?
So the way that that's looked at, so that's a permit, yes, it's part of like registering to vote. You have a permanent address. This is where you live. This is where your permanent address is, as opposed to a seasonal resident where you're here part of the time, your voter registration is elsewhere, your driver's license is elsewhere.
So like second homeowners who've moved to Aspen permanently, like after COVID, which is like a ton, but still register to vote in Florida for tax purposes, or that's where they own a home, but they live here 11 and a half months out of the year. We're missing all that growth in these diagrams, right?
Well, you're using census data, right? Here,
Yeah, state
So-
demography, so that pulls from census and then that's calibrated with local.
and
data.
census, so when you fill it, so this is all like defined by the census, and the census defines permanent residents as 50% in 1 day.
Okay.
Oh, all right.
So that's how, so when
It's
you're,
self-reported.
yeah, it's self-reported, and then it's modeled, right? And so then they're modeling it from there, but that's when you get your census, it's basically you are filling it out at your place of residence of 50% in 1 day, I think is how they're defining it.
So we-
Yeah, and the other thing, just to kind of note on that, most of the current data is through, especially on population, is through 2022. And we know that even in the last few years, some of those trends have changed or, increased substantially. So that's also kind of a piece too, is that there is increased vacancy, and we know that that's, could be even in the last few years. Yeah, and
The
Yeah.
bigger question is going back to that is should the plan be based on permanent residents, because the permanent residence is such a small portion of
Yeah.
people that are here. I mean, that's the takeaway I get, 17,000 people. I'm often wondering what the population of the county is. 17,000 people is the population is what you're telling me, but that's not the community.
mhm,
It doesn't feel like, and so if we're using this as a planning tool, and I don't. Well, so if we're using that as the planning tool, is this the best way to measure the demographics for a planning tool?
mhm.
That says when that's not really what the population is, and maybe it is. But,
Yeah,
so that's for this community, it's very difficult.
totally. And I would just say in terms of different ways to get at that visitation number. So again, this is kind of county profile, like broad brush, every county does it.
Yeah.
We know that there's different ways that our county's different, that we have to calibrate the data to understand differently. So in terms of that visitation, whether that's seasonal, that people are just coming as tourists or coming to their second home, there's different ways that we can study that data. That's through like wastewater, seeing
Yeah.
like big peaks around 4th of July weekend, for example. That's seen through these other forms of intensity, transportation intensity, whether that's through. So totally,
I
to
think
your
that-
point, Doug, it's like that, those are definitely a part of the conversation in terms of projections and so much what the growth committee got at. But this is just kind of looking broad scale, and part of this is to identify, hey, this is what the data is showing, our lived experience is actually different.
How important in the planning process is that number, I guess, really is where I would go with it. Is the 70, does it really drive many decisions? The question, I would guess that it doesn't probably, because, there's peaks, 4th of July, Christmas, whatever. But the base population, I feel like Zach is talking about, it's not 17,000 people at this point.
Yeah.
Mhm,
And so. Zach, that's a great point.
mhm.
So, but my question remains is. Whether it's 17 or 25, does it really matter for what we're talking about?
Mhm.
I think it's just trying to quantify, right, a lot of this whole process is around that intensity that we're feeling. So the numbers aren't so much, it's trying to understand and quantify the intensity we're feeling. Well, and a lot of it is like, yeah, while the population growth is not demonstrating all the growth, we know it is, and that's straining from the county's perspective. It's straining our infrastructure, right? It's straining the roads, it's straining, that's the value of it, is like, okay, how can we start to just understand that quantify that intensity that we're feeling and what that intensity is straining on all the resources, and then how do we respond to it?
Mhm. But I think the way that that 17,000 does play in is that you're thinking this community was, and a lot of the infrastructure was aimed at more of that 17,000. If it's actually way higher, then that's a different conversation in terms of wear and tear on roads, infrastructure, public services facilities. You know, that means there's kind of a delta then in terms of what's actually the data showing and then what the intensity we're feeling. There's a gap in terms of how we respond to that. So I think that 17,000 isn't the number that we're using to think about. You know, we're not planning anything specific to, well, 17,000 community has X, but it's a kind of marker to think this is where that target is. But we know there's fluctuations substantially beyond that.
Especially with a county that's 20 miles away, it's gonna grow 34%.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally. So, yeah, and we'll kind of get into these conversations further too, as we get into this. So living wage risen from 2000, so from the last comprehensive plan was in 2003, so since 2000, living wage, so what it means to make a living, which is pay your rent, pay your mortgage, purchase food, be able to provide, you know, transportation, has risen 200%. Well, the median annual income has increased, but not kept up with that, increased by only 62%. So that's a gap, that's a delta of about $50,000 between what it means to make a living and actually afford a quality of life here compared to what the average living wage is. So just exacerbating that kind of intensity and that economic difference that's felt.
That's free market housing. As opposed to employee housing number. I mean, housing is obviously a big piece of it, so. So that 50, that gap there is based on free market. as
The
opposed-
living wage would be based around a free market, yeah, but that would either be a rent or an own, so,
Right,
so, yeah. Yeah. In terms of talking about housing, so there are more housing units have been built, but primarily these are unoccupied second homes. So that housing number has gone up 3,400 since 2000. But our vacancy rate, you can see, is at 46%, again, compared to Colorado at 10.4. The other piece that's interesting too, another way to look at that is we talk about the household population to total housing units. So that's for one house, how many people would theoretically live there. So in Colorado in 2022, for one household, 2.2 people. Pitkin County, one home, 1.24. So it's also just talking about the efficiency of our housing stock, right? That the efficiency is much lower in Pitkin County comparatively.
It's dropping throughout the state.
It is dropping throughout the state. Yeah, dropping throughout the state has always been lower in Pitkin County and continues to drop in Pitkin County. And just in a lot of these trends, to that point, a lot of these trends, we're seeing it across Colorado, but it's that much more exacerbated here in Pitkin County. So cost of living, so the base cost of living nationally is 100. Compared to that 100 average, Pitkin County's cost of living is 220. Substantially higher than that national average and 95% higher than the rest of the state. So really, really substantial for what that looks like. Primarily, that's driven by housing. And this is showing these are the free market. Mean average sale price for single homes has risen from about 3 million in 2018, 2.79 to be exact, to 7.9 million in 2024. So that's 183% increase in 6 years. So pretty substantial. Multifamily also has increased, not to the same extent, but also has been substantial. From the jobs and employment piece, so this is looking at a variety of different, the kind of full breadth of different sectors across our economy. And the largest sectors being lodging and food service, arts, entertainment, and recreation, and then government. Interesting when we look at the kind of traditional tourist economy, which is the traditionally main driver in resort communities in the West. And Mountain West in Colorado comprises 43% of our workforce, and that's an updated number as of this last month. You know, a lot of the discussions too are, well, we know there's a tourist economy, which would be traditionally those sectors of lodging, food service, arts, entertainment, retail, et cetera. Those are really in mid to low wage jobs. We know that there's another, we know that this other economy that is really a driver, that the growth committee talked about, this kind of private residential sector, which is kind of generally mid to higher wage jobs, hard to fit it exactly into all of the NIACS sectors, but is interesting as we look at, and we'll kind of get into that further, but pulling away from more of those traditional sectors, especially within the tourist economy.
And these are people that live in Picken County and work in Picken County.
These are jobs in Picken County, so
Job.
not necessarily they're not necessarily living
Okay.
in Picken County, so we'll get, so the workers, so the inflow and outflow of workers, and, you know, again, a lot of this is from the growth committee, especially, you know, been talked about before, but 62% of the workforce is coming from outside of Picken County. And of that, 24% are traveling for over 50 miles. And that's data from 2021. That's only, kind of to your point, like that's only increased, right? And we're seeing that coming from across the Colorado River Valley, Grand Junction, Montrose, Delta, Denver, kind of our big polls. This also means labor earnings, so wages earned in Picken County that are leaving, that are going home with people who are earning those wages to other counties. So in 2022, that net flow of earnings was $409 million. So wages earned at jobs in Picken County that are going outside of Picken County. Which is, you know, something to discuss as part of this. There's a risk then as local economies, our local economy is at risk as adjacent counties have the potential to potentially provide competitive wages, not as much travel time, industries that are comparable. And, you know, potential for us to think about what that means for Picken County is some of that traditional economy can get pulled out into other counties. Just looking at that in terms of what that looks like in our most immediate adjacent counties. So the change in jobs, this is from 2010, so it's helpful because that's looking at post-recession compared to population change. So looking at lodging and food service in Picken County has increased 7%, but in Garfield County, that's gone up 26%, so substantially higher. The population in Garfield County has also increased 11%, but that 26 is substantial. Same with arts, entertainment, recreation, that has increased in Picken County, 32, but that 81% increase in Garfield County is substantial. There's another county that has a similar industry that's also competitive and closer to where you actually live. That's definitely pulling away from workers that could be coming into Picken County. Real estate, you know, conversely, Picken County, that's grown 10%. Garfield, that's only 1, much lower. And Eagle County also 16%. So looking at some of those other sectors that we know are prevalent in our local economy. Construction in Picken County has the construction industry. This shows minus 13%. That doesn't mean that construction activity is not happening in Picken County. That means that firms are relocating to these other adjacent counties. So we look at Garfield and Eagle County. So Garfield, 27% increase. So that work and that activity may be taking place and likely often is taking place in Picken County, but the actual both workforce and then headquarters of those firms and contractor base is not happening in Picken County. So again, just looking at kind of where those shifts are happening, often that's happening down valley and outside of Picken County. the transportation, and I would just say we are, as a part of this broader Vision 2050 process, working on additional transportation studies that's really gonna look at rural parts of the county to understand that transportation intensity in rural areas. That's happening now, so this data doesn't capture rural, kind of rural intensity. But in terms of what we do see currently, so, many of us take RAFTA, largest rural transit agency. That ridership has really increased year over year. That 2020 is a dip for COVID. 2024, this is showing year to date, but that's on track to be back with that 2015. So on track from increased ridership. But we're also seeing increased activity on Highway 82, as we all are very much aware. So from 2000, that Highway 82 average annual daily traffic counts has increased 37%. Highway 133 has increased 14% over that same time period. And it's interesting on this Highway 82, this is a counter that's a continuous count at Old Snowmass and 82. That's data that we also track. I track on a monthly basis and a kind of year over year. It's interesting to see those peaks in the summer. While it is increasing, it's very, very marginal, and we're really starting to see getting to that, almost kind of maximum capacity where it's like it's going up, but it can't go up much more. Another note on the AADT, just to clarify these numbers, is that that's counting traffic going both directions. So when you see that 22,400, that would be, so divide that by 2 to think about how many people are going one way, just so we're clear on that would be about 11,000 people going up Valley and coming down Valley. Another kind of piece of this is the geographic context for Pitkin County. So 85% of land in Pitkin County is publicly owned. That's either by the state or by the federal government. That majority, 79%, is managed by the U.S. Forest Service. Certainly there are conservation easements on private land that's shown here, but not a part of that 85%. Comparison to other counties, the work group was interested in that. So Routt County is at 80%, that's state and public land. Rock County at 48, San Miguel County at 64. And this is just as part of the conversation for decision-making, especially from a land use and kind of broad scale comprehensive policy planning, is that majority of the land is really owned by, is public land. So U.S. Forest Service is often thinking about SKICO leasing land on forest. So it's a part of the conversation around decision-making and certainly a part of the conversation in terms of our local economy. Related to different types of hazards. So this is pulling aspects from the hazard mitigation plan, or the Pitkin County Hazard Mitigation Plan. So larger risks from an environmental hazard standpoint, drought, geologic hazards, wildfire, winter storm. We generally recognize that. And areas primarily with the highest hazard and threat are generally in areas where we have private land. So often constraining development, constraining growth in areas where that private land is happening. Climate, probably graphs, that we're familiar with seeing. What's in the pink is showing, these are modeled projection averaged by different emission scenarios. So that pink is showing in a high emission scenario, how much that average temperature will increase. And that blue is showing in a lower emission scenario, how much that might increase. So the kind of big takeaway here is that increased temperature increasing, fewer days with freezing temperatures, meaning more precipitation arriving in rain rather than arriving in snow. Increased drought prevalence, which impacts agriculture, wildfire risk, mudslides, reduced snowpack, local and recreational impacts. So projection, something that we're certainly aware of and tracking throughout as a real driver for both the growth committee's recommendations and aspects of our comprehensive plan as we think about the climate action piece that's really a through line throughout this process. So that's kind of that's a snapshot of the community profile. I'll just stop here and see if there's any, particular questions about that, and then you kind of carry on, but happy to field any further questions or thoughts. Jeffrey?
He's staring at his notebook.
Right, which one do I say first? What's the best question?
I mean, I guess there's, we just back up and go, there's a threat to the overall economy. Like, if you just lift your head up out of the sand here with all the data is great. I'm like, I would love an educational slide, and the fact that we don't have a university here, what's the population base in terms of education? So I think that's a missing piece just from a data standpoint.
And we do have that. We do
Yeah,
show that here, but yeah.
But it's like,
Good note.
in terms of the overall conversation, so I guess.
Yeah.
The elephant in the room is climate change, and, this board sat through the ski rec master plans for most of the mountains and the community plans, and so, I think the takeaway from this conversation was like, oh, this tension in the room beyond the bang ups on Highway 82 is really the change in our economy. If it's both a workforce that lives and works down valley, there's a threat. If we're not gonna get a 100-day pan again in the next couple of years, that's a threat. So, I'm wondering how those bigger questions then feed into an update, to a plan. So, no, I think this is great. This great baseline. Thank you for using Elizabeth's data.
While she's still around, she's retiring soon.
Is she?
Yeah,
And sorry, it's
Yeah.
a state tomographer if you don't.
yeah, you're right. That's like a deep cut.
Yeah.
I would. I
If
don't
you
know.
if you ever have a chance, like YouTube Elizabeth, watch her for an hour. It's fantastic. Those are my biggies. I mean, I think it's just, let's roll back up again and say, okay. Much like the ski companies come in and said, we have a threat to our business plan and our business model, we're, and even, you can say, well, we're feeling that in the economy, right? There's not a summer break anymore. We're ziplining through, US Forest Service. So what are we picking doing that same sort of pivot we've heard from our commercial, corporate, main corporate employers in the valley. So, that's my takeaway from your presentation. It's like, okay, you string together everything we've heard from major employers. They're shifting. How's the county shifting?
I didn't understand what you're saying about education. You're talking about the education level of the populace? Is that what that
So
was?
there was, I guess, two parts to it. One is we don't have a, we're a rural recreational resort economy, 43%, I think was the update. And what's missing here, from a lifestyle standpoint is we have no higher education here. Sorry, CMC, I'm not knocking, but we have no higher degree programs here. So that attracts different talent here. I can't teach at night. I can't get, an educational position as a, and stay fresh. So it's a demographics question. Versus if you're in Gunnison, you've got Western State, thank you. Or if you're in Denver or elsewhere. So it's, you're going 4 hours to an accredited degree, basically is my comments. So, and I think it's missing in the overall, as we did a little bit of a deep dive into the financial picture, but I also think there's the educational piece that goes with that. All right, I want more slides.
There are more. This is just
I
the.
would say about the climate change piece, climate change is happening worldwide, and at the top of the watershed, we're gonna have less impact from. Because people are gonna continue to come, because it's not as miserable here as it is in Grand Junction, even along Phoenix or wherever. And so, climb the ski, we might lose some ski days, and we might have to go higher up Elk Camp to have enjoyable temperatures, but it's a lot better than the other places, and so it's gonna continue to attract people here. That's be my take. I think that you know, the population number 17 and the 3% growth rate and everything, you know, they're all projections. But, you know, I think that as we live in Pickens County is gonna become more and more desirable with climate change.
Mhm. Mhm.
I guess I'm trying to be the pessimist in the room and say, okay, dude, Colorado Compact, like, we're oversubscribed and we're talking drought. And we just approved 300 acres. I mean, all the work over the summer was basically snowmaking on Ajax and Snowmass. So it seems like it's not exactly a sustainable model. So I'm just trying to be the,
I can agree entirely. I mean, but my point is, I don't think that we're gonna lose, tourism because of it. I think that there's gonna be less skiing and it's gonna be less desirable because of the temperature, but it's gonna be better than the alternative.
Mhm.
yeah, yeah.
There's no-
And they're kind of two different questions, right? The desirability from a location standpoint based on climate change versus on what's possible from an infrastructure and drought and kind of realities standpoint.
And again, I came from a catastrophe meeting this morning, which is basically, okay, what if we're uninsurable? So I'm coming out of that world this morning too. This is very bright and sunny, I appreciate it. But from a wildfire preparedness and insurability standpoint,
Like as a county, uninsurable, or what entity would be uninsurable?
individual risk, homeowner risk.
Yeah.
Right.
It's already happening.
Yeah, it's the same thing like
It's
a beach house in Florida,
Yeah.
you
And
can't
our-
get insurance.
and our-
Yeah.
Right, people are they're pulling out.
Yep.
Our backstop's called Fair Plan.
Yep.
You know, it won't insure your spare bedroom,
Mhm.
so, yeah, I mean,
Right.
I guess I'm just trying to say, like, put a little bit more risk in the plan, put a little bit more risk in the thinking. Cause I think again, I'll pick on Skico, but I think they're thinking risk and they're thinking, how do we keep, how does this become a sustainable business model given change?
Yeah, and I think Doug, to your point, kind of tourism will continue, and I think the community risk is. But the workforce is going to continue to not be able to service it, right? And so that, like, when we're thinking about it from the community values, some of this will continue, but there's an active place that I think. People are asking Pickens County to say, but there's an element of what can we be doing to try and create that balance of, keeping a workforce here to keep the generator going, whatever
Mhm.
analogy to use.
And just to take that a little bit further, I mean, part of the comp plan conversation too, I think, is how much of a county role. What will the county's role be in that and how active will that be or not be? And that's, part of that economic health conversation, I think, is really what's given that dynamic from a county standpoint. What are the options to kind of help balance and how much of that is. What's the kind of role of government in that or not?
Because Jeffrey, yeah, historically, the county really hasn't played a role in the economy. So, yeah. Is it time for a shift? What does that look like? Is it appropriate for the county to play a role? So those are all questions we need to be asking.
The county's role historically has been to try and slow the economy down. The only question is, if that's gonna continue to be.
Yeah.
I mean, if you take a step forward, actually, the tension, so I tried to grab all the tensions you described, thank you. One of your comments was the tensions in the room, whether it's Highway 82 or elsewhere. A lot of those, you sit there and say, okay, some of them are founded in land use code,
Sure.
and the fact that, we're geographically constrained, we have great partners in BLM and US Forest Service, and that land's undevelopable. But I would also, again, I would take that slide a step forward and say, there's probably another percentage of land that's also undevelopable because it's steep slope or high hazard or whatever else. So you actually end up with, we're fairly built out geographically, and we're going to continue to outsource labor, from further and further away. So by stocking Newcastle and Rifle now. Sorry, sarcasm. But I don't know how to counter that.
Mhm.
Right, so we had Base Village that just came out with an ADU policy that was met with some resistance. But it was probably the best thing they could possibly do to have an opportunity to have a local workforce in Snowmass. So.
I'd like to see the that population growth trend graph, like cross-referenced with the wastewater use graph, you know what I mean, as a trend, just to see, because I think there's like a huge gap in there that we're missing, and that might be one of the ways to sort of see the difference between this 6.9% growth number and what the actual growth number is in second homeowners that have moved here full-time. They're just not,
Mhm.
and they're just
Or
not
using
registered.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I have to interrupt. I meant to, or using their second homes as mini hotels.
Yeah,
That's
Mhm.
really what I think. is
Yeah,
driving
and-
a
And
lot
it's
of it.
totally, and it's interesting because the wastewater is a proxy, right? Like how many gallons you flush isn't like based on per person, you know, some people have more efficient toilets
there's
versus
like a
not.
big.
But in
trend
terms
there,
of seeing
yeah.
the trend line and that directional trend line, totally, you can really
And
see
if
that
one's
kind of
going like
increase.
this, even if you took out the, whatever you wanna call it, the periods, time of the year that are sort of anomalies, like Christmas week, 4th of July.
Yeah.
You just sort of got to average for like let's just say the month of October now that we're in, that's technically like, we're supposed to be in the off season right now. And it's not there's, the amount of
Yeah,
homeowners that are just here and usually consistently, traditionally leave town after Jazz Aspen and Labor Day and are staying here through Halloween. It's since COVID,
yeah,
I would, if I had to put a number, I don't know what number I put on it, but it's huge. Like, and you can, I mean, that's just something I know from paying attention to it, and that number doesn't line up, that thing is there, and maybe they're not full-time residents, maybe they,
mhm.
but they're here for a huge amount of times that are not traditionally,
Yeah. Well, just a plug for, I do a monthly economic indicator report and that data is available on Picken County. I can send that out to P and Z.
Yeah.
You know, the one thing too to look at is that wastewater is based on Aspen Sands numbers. So we also know that unincorporated, there's a lot of
Yeah.
septic systems
you're
that
on a
are off,
septic,
so it's
yeah.
not capturing that to that
Mhm.
extent. But in terms of seeing that in terms of, around the urban growth boundary and municipalities, it does capture
Yeah.
that,
Mhm.
but.
It'd be easy to add SWSD to that information as well.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, well, let me just keep us moving.
Yeah.
This is initial feedback from that community survey. The question was, what do you see Picken County? What's a word to describe the Picken County you'd like to see in 2050? Balanced, community, affordable, helpful to kind of feel like what we've established in terms of goals around the Vision 2050 coming out of the growth committee, seem generally on track. There's a few outliers in here, but in general, balanced, community,
Mayhem.
affordable.
So,
Right, the mayhem, it was like, did you read the question or is that what you want? I don't know. So that's just, we've got kind of the full report, but that's kind of a word cloud to say that. A few takeaways from, I'll go through these kind of quickly, but in talking about the work group, these are kind of the things that they were really interested in and kind of additional information that we will include in the existing conditions and kind of move forward in terms of the rest of our process. So, tourist economy, there was kind of this thought that 43% that felt low. Again, we're, as a part of the broader Vision 2050 process, we're doing a further economic dive and looking at that public facing economy versus the private facing economy. Traditionally, the jobs that are in the tourist economy, lodging, food service, arts, entertainment, and the public facing economy, whereas that private facing being more related to large residential homes. So that would be service, maintenance, kind of operations, et cetera. So kind of looking at that distinction, which we will continue to do. Workforce inflow, just that 62% people, the feedback was, yeah, that does feel, there's a lot of people coming into the community, validating just that there's a lot of migration coming in daily, but then actual firms and businesses relocating down valley. That commuting distance, there was feedback, thought that there would be more than 25% people driving more than 50 miles, and there may be. Again, that data is from 2021. As we do further transportation data, we'll look at that. We'll be looking at, so questions remain, transportation data, kind of feedback about looking at origin destination, single occupancy vehicles, kind of a note on this too, Pitkin County is putting in a variety of automatic vehicle counters, which will have in more rural parts of the county, which will have more calibration in terms of whether that's a car, a truck, a larger van vehicle. So we'll get kind of more calibrated data that will be kind of ongoing anyway. And then the public lands just kind of interested to see how that shook out with compared to other counties. This is just kind of broad brushstrokes and kind of just to share from a process standpoint, we will be, as we're moving through this process and as we get feedback additionally from you all from PNC, we will be this kind of final existing conditions report will be additive. We'll be gathering kind of inputs throughout. And then when we do our final kind of pen to paper and drafts, that will be in the early next year where we'll be seeing actual, kind of the full existing conditions data that you all can look at as a set. So I'm gonna just move us into, so that existing conditions was kind of where, understanding of where we are, then this topic area groundwork, which is where we're going in the next phase, or where, the kind of phase that we're in now. We are moving forward with the scope of the comprehensive plan within these 5 different plan elements. I think we talked about this before, built environment, natural environment, economic health, community health, regional approach. Many of these, like we said, we have a strong policy basis for, whether that's a currently adopted plan, a county program, or some other direct BOCC, kind of direction. And these different policy areas, this is flexible at this point in time, but these are different areas where we're going to be diving in further, acknowledging some of the tensions between them and, ultimately articulating what that policy direction will be. That will be, worked through from a staff standpoint, vetted through with the work group, and then ultimately adopted and directed by you all as PNC. Do you want to?
Sure. So, yeah, just to follow up on that conversation about tensions that exist, the Community Growth Advisory Committee spent a lot of time talking about those tensions and revealing the fact that there are indeed tensions inherent between all of our community values and goals. And not to go through everything, but there were a couple that stood out. Clearly, there's a need to address affordable housing. At the same time, we recognize that affordable housing is growth, right? And it's got to be located somewhere. And at the same time, we're acknowledging the fact that we need to manage growth. So how do we balance those 2 objectives? That's definitely something that we'll be looking at moving forward. And then another tension that was revealed in that report and in the discussion was around climate action, right? The community wants to be very proactive on the climate action side of things. And that is going to result in the need for some infrastructure around renewable energy, and taking ownership of that renewable energy infrastructure. That objective may compete with some of our rural character preservation goals, and wildlife impacts are something that we're going to want to be looking at as we look at the location of that infrastructure, right? So those are just a couple of the tensions that were identified that resulted in a lot of discussion at the Community Growth Advisory meetings. And then we met recently, early September, with the work group, the Vision 2050 project work group. And we've already talked about this a bit. Hannah alluded to the fact that one of the things that they identified as a tension was the fact that we have 2 competing economies in the valley, right? We have the public-facing economy that's really based around the tourist economy, and then we have the privatized economy that's based around the luxury residential homes that have a need for management and services. And both of those economies are competing for workers and, also resulting in the need for affordable housing, right? And, you know, that tension is something that we need to address. Really, we need to make some decisions around priorities related to public investments in infrastructure for affordable housing. And, we need to be looking at the community as a whole. You know, we have these two really separate economies that are somewhat diverse and divisive. So we need to really be looking at the community as a whole when we look at public investments around affordable housing was one of the things that was really focused on. So I don't know if there's anything else on that topic that anyone else that Kara wants to add to that conversation, but I think that was the gist of it. Right. Okay. Thank you, Elena.
Sure, and I'll just kind of share out again, these were, as we're getting into this is moving into that policy area deep dive, so what we're sharing is kind of acknowledged issues to be addressed, not solutions or how we are addressing them at this point. But so feedback again from the work group around thinking about those 5 plan elements and some of the tensions between them is just recognizing that there's trade-offs. And part of our discussion on the October 30th open house is really, what are some of those trade-offs? What are some acceptable tolerances around these trade-offs? Again, the growth, what we see in terms of population growth versus the lived experience, same as what we talked about here, just how we articulate what is happening from a population increase from more of a seasonal or from tourism, from kind of second homes is different than what we're seeing from the actual population numbers. The growth in affordable housing, a lot of the discussion too, and recommendations from the growth committee and discussions again that we'll have on October 30th about the UGB, where density is appropriate, what that density would look like. And again, kind of basing from the recommendations from the CGAC about where and what might be appropriate density outside of the UGB. Affordable housing, I think this is what Ellen was getting at, just the idea of affordable housing for who is that supporting, and what are the economies and the kind of local economy workforce that we want to support with different types of affordable housing. Infrastructure, climate action, quality of life, recognizing that each of these have investments and potential land use impacts related to transportation, clean energy, renewables, water, wastewater. So balancing what the community value is with also our current land use patterns or changes to our land use patterns. So again, kind of those are the discussions of how this will play out in terms of from a land use standpoint. Does that make sense? Any questions there, or other kind of thoughts in terms of big ideas or tensions?
Questions?
And then it was just gonna,
No, I was just gonna say, I think we all need to go back and reread Jenny Stuber.
I'm not sure if I could reread it, because I don't know if I read it.
So
Aspen's Impossible Math.
Oh,
Book
right.
that
Oh,
came
yeah,
out.
yeah.
the super gentrification, so a lot of the comments Zach made, I mean, it's just, right, we read it pre-COVID. And it's really interesting to see if, you know, either she did a follow-up or if you reread it post,
where are we?
right? Because part of the elephant in the room is we built an economy based on.
That is the elephant in the room. Yeah.
We built an economy based on people not using it. Right, that was sort of her point, right? You don't vote here and you just live your parts on it. And we enjoy all the benefits, the socioeconomic benefits of a music festival based on absentee ownership. So we should all go reread Jenny Stuber.
Okay, you can add that to the meeting notes.
Yeah, I mean, it gets into the conversation too about quality of life, right? It's quality of life. Is that really based on? You know, there's some interesting studies too that Northwest Cog did about tourism-based economy
Yeah.
versus actual people who live here. I can't remember exactly how they defined it, but this like my quality of life as a local versus the quality of life for a tourist or for a visitor. Kind of trade-offs between those.
Where do you think Pitkin is on that pendulum? Or that scatter plot?
Well, they said where we were on the, I mean, there was a study that said it was more in terms of the visitor side, certainly, but that's a.
And the Community Growth Advisory Committee spent a lot of time talking about where we are on that pendulum and as it relates to quality of life, a lot.
I think a lot of the recommendations are to try and move that pendulum. So.
Yeah, the viewers of this, also here to listen, but, I think, but I think talking about a really important. It's the problem of my time, 29 years old, I found recently there's this statistic 51% of women over 30 that are grown up a child, I think the housing kind of comes back to all of that. Little shoebox in there. Jack up your rent, you go somewhere else, you know, the stability of life, that maybe was once taken for granted. And so that's created all these issues with people in my hand. And I don't know, I think it's important as to the question, why, because this isn't just happening in Pickens County. This is happening everywhere, baby boomers. Biggest generation ever, and then millennials were the second biggest generation ever going in age. So get used, so maybe we have to demonstrate, okay, there's somebody who's not like your cousin living in the ADU and somebody who's working in the county is living on your property and you're having some kind of tax incentive or some kind of incentive to these people, because when money's no object to you, why do you want to have some person living on your property? So all different kinds of things. Like, some of these challenges are unique when thinking about those here, but also because there's so many resources, people are so resourceful here. I think that we should treat that as an advantage, and we can definitely figure it all out. I guess the last thing, I'm not sure like how many people live in their car, but a lot of people live in their car. And I'm not sure if that goes into the data over here or not, but I would say probably 30 or 40% of the people I've met in their 20s here live in their car. I have a property in Brush Creek Village. I don't live in my car. I live in Evergreen, but people are kind of just making it work however they can. And it's all right. It's like the Chris Farley band Down by the River. That's like the dream for people now, because we didn't allow enough new housing to be built. So that's kind of my whole thought about this whole thing. I think there's a lot of good stuff being talked about here today. I'm excited to see it.
Awesome, thanks. All right,
Can jump-
just, Jasmine?
Oh.
Do you have any comment about the comp plan or any questions or anything you'd like to add?
Jasmine, are you able to hear us?
Yes and no, you keep fading in and out.
Okay,
I think my screen keeps freezing as well.
okay, thank you for the update. Sorry, we all got kicked out a little while ago. Do you have any comments at this time on this?
Not at this time.
All right, great. So next step for the
Um,
comp plan.
Yeah, I want to respond to, I will jump into that in a second, but on Jeffrey's comment related to renewable energy infrastructure, locally owned renewable energy infrastructure. Granted that even if it's located along Highway 82, policy right now directs that kind of intense development to be located within the urban growth boundary areas, right? So there is a question of maybe not in the very rural valleys, drainages in the county. There's still a question to grapple with there. Let's walk through next steps for the Planning and Zoning Commission. You will be, on October 15th, we've scheduled a growth management TDR workshop with the Planning and Zoning Commission. That's really focusing on specifics that were raised in the Community Growth Advisory Committee report. And then October 30th, as Hannah Hunt alluded to, we'll be holding the Comprehensive Plan Community Workshop. It's in the Dunaway room in the library from 5 to 7. And you are invited, right? I think you are invited to attend not as a quorum, but yeah, we'll get back to you on Planning and Zoning Commission participation in that workshop. And then November 13th, we'll be meeting again with the work group on the comprehensive plan, and then we'll come back to you after that work group meeting to continue to update you on the comprehensive plan and give you the feedback that we received from the work group at that earlier November meeting. Next slide.
Can you remove EHIF from October 15th?
That was just
That's just
items
rough
related
related.
to the comp plan,
Yeah,
yeah.
sorry.
Yeah,
In that
sorry.
October 15th, TDR workshop, is there? Do we have a discussion about fractional TDRs on the agenda for that? Cause I know we've been talking about that for like 5 or 6 years, so. Let's
So
see if that's something that's gonna be
what-
on the table to
so
talk
what-
about.
This is intended to do is kind of have, that can certainly be a topic to throw out. We're starting to, move forward some of the growth committee recommendations. We're doing some background work on TDRs and growth management. We did like a staff workshop where everybody said, here's all of my issues when I score a growth management application and how fun it is to go to the P&Z with that. So we all did that and I was like, yeah, we've done this before with P&Z, but we should really be doing that as part of that process now. So part of it's getting a download on
Okay,
the growth management and how that works and doesn't work for you. As well as any sort of thoughts you have, you know, on, really, it's more the way the system is working today, and clearly that would be a point of. It doesn't work well when we, you know, it's all 2,500 square feet, so,
Yep.
so yes, it's really wanting to just pick your brains. On any topics related to growth management and TDRs. So we can help bring that to the consultants who are helping us work through, you know, what those recommendations might look like when we get around to code.
All right. Great.
So,
Well,
um,
if that's too, if we're too early for that or too late, or I guess it would be too early, but that's definitely
you know,
something I'd
I mean,
like to.
again, to my point, it's like, right, an issue you see with the current TDR program is that's a limitation of.
Yeah.
And what that might look like. The growth committee, you know, one of their recommendations is looking at more 500 square foot increments, which changes a lot,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
That's your
related to
frac,
that.
you know.
So.
That's a
Right,
fractional,
it's-
yeah, or if
right,
this is a
it
solution,
may
or
not
if
be a fractional,
planning
but
staff
it's
thinks
just
it's gonna help, or if it's gonna be like.
Yeah.
More of a hindrance, or, you know, but I know that's been something that this board has
Been on the
heard
table.
about and talked about since I have 7 years or whatever, and so it'd be nice to, if we're doing a TDR workshop, to see if that's something people are interested in. Yeah, that's it.
So then, thanks, next slide. So we've also scheduled a series of meetings, we're calling them focus groups, to gather, subject matter experts, to discuss specific topics. And so the first focus group came together on September 18th. It was around energy code updates. And it was apparently very well attended, and we got some great feedback and support for the energy code amendments that will be forthcoming. So that was, I think, a success. And on October 16th, yeah, we'll be looking at pulling together a focus group to look at floor area ratio and the net parcel discussion that was raised in the Community Growth Advisory Committee report. And then yeah, we talked about the November 18th meeting. That's also scheduled as a focus group. So those are upcoming, and we'll keep you in the loop. If you go to the next slide.
And just to be clear, these are kind of happening, and this is just an update from the broader project, not
Right.
necessarily, not that these are specific to the comprehensive plan. There may be aspects that rub shoulders, but just
Yeah,
the broader
they
project.
may inform comprehensive plan topics, but yeah, they're really to focus on the Vision 2050 project, code amendments. So there are opportunities to engage. We've got, from a digital standpoint, we have a dedicated project webpage for all aspects of the project. The link is here. There is a newsletter and social media updates that will be published throughout the process. And well, that value survey that we referred to, the community value survey, was open through the end of September, and we got some pretty good input from that from that survey. So then the targeted engagement we've discussed, we've got the focus groups. We'll be coming to the Planning and Zoning Commission typically on a monthly basis. For the long range meetings, we'll be covering comp plan issues. And then the work group meetings will be ongoing, and as Hannah Hunt suggested, there's a cadence where we'll be meeting with the work group on specific topics, and then we'll come to you to provide an update and get more input from you. So yeah, in terms of community education, we've got this community open house on October 30th specific to the comprehensive plan. If you have any other ideas about how best to reach out to the community, please let us know. That would be great. And I think is that the last?
You know, as a
one?
member of the baby boom generation, I would think that the newspaper is a good source, because a lot of people in this community read the newspaper.
Mhm.
Well, one of,
So having this
Yeah.
information, not just on social media,
Yeah,
and
having it. in
That's
the
good
newspaper.
point.
yeah,
And
it's going to, yeah.
yeah, and one of the things that we recognize is the fact that sometimes we have the same people with an interest in attending the meetings around comprehensive plan and land use code changes, but we may be missing a whole segment of the workforce community as an example, that we'd like to include in the conversation. So any thoughts about how best to reach out to those?
You know, the demographics show the
Yeah.
community's aging as well, you know.
Right.
Over 45, so.
Right, so, yeah, older, younger, typically, I think we have probably an older, crew coming to these meetings and events,
I
but,
think, yeah, my point is the people that come, as you said, are all the same. I think there's a big herd population that
right,
is tuned in and listens, but doesn't necessarily come and participate.
Engage,
Right.
yeah,
At the open house.
right,
And so educating them anyway, whether or not
yeah,
they react to it, at least they know what's happening.
true,
Yeah,
yeah,
and the kind of approach is to have these in-person, options for in-person, options for digital.
right,
Options for, to really try to use all different means to engage, knowing that people have different preferences and different availability, et cetera. But it's a good point, Doug.
thank you, yeah. I think
So that's the
it.
comp plan update. Thanks for your feedback.
Awesome. Thank you
And
guys.
time, yeah, okay, good.
Well,
Pass it on to,
yeah, next item on the agenda with Suzanne is land use code text and rezoning amendments for short-term R&R, TR1 and TR2 zone districts.
So. Let's see, to back up, short-term rentals currently live in the county code and not in the land use code. At all. So the Title VI of the county code is the short-term rental code. That was adopted in 2022. At the time initially, the board allowed for short-term rentals in rural remote, specifically through a special review process. After having a couple of those in front of them, they then amended the short-term rental code to prohibit anybody from applying or getting a license in rural remote. So that is the current status under the short-term rental code.
Were any of the original ones grandfathered in? Originally, they were allowing it.
So no, there were none that were approved by the board once the new STR code went into effect.
And we're only talking about rural and remote right now, so.
So that is in the
Yeah.
short-term rental code, just rural remote, and again, as defined in the STR code, it's less than 30 days. So, right, some people in rural remote can be renting for over 30 days.
Yeah.
So that's still an option. It's not governed by the short-term rental code. There's been some state legislation that popped up last year, didn't go anywhere, but there's some consideration of that maybe taking away some of the authority of the county related to the short-term rental regulations. And in order to be very secure in that prohibition in rural remote, we were asked to amend the land use code to do that. In looking at that, I feel like all of the findings that were made by the board in prohibiting it in rural remote, which was all about what the whole intent of rural remote is. It's remote. It doesn't have emergency services. It's, concerns about people's safety, et cetera, all of those things. In looking at our code, I feel like the TR1 and TR2 zone districts, which are basically a piece of Spugler Mountain and a piece of Shadow Mountain that are a transition between town and the rural remote zone beyond, also really have those same characteristics as rural remote. Like they were written as a transition, but they have very similar restrictions in terms of the size. I never get them straight, but I think they both have maybe not 1,000 square foot limitation. Maybe one has 1,000, one allows 2,500. But they're limited because it was still a recognition that there are limited services, limited access. All of those same criteria that we applied with rural remote. So in doing this amendment now, pretty narrowly, because again, this is kind of the first time we've delved into the short-term rental piece in the land use code since it's been living separately in Title VI. I put in the rural remote to back that up in the land use code, but I also added in TR1 and TR2. So the amendments in front of you are kind of pretty simple language wise, in terms of just basically saying that short-term rental as defined in the STR code, so we're not using the same definition that's in Title 12, would be prohibited in those 3 zone districts. When I first started looking at it, and we think, well, it's a no new use, am I going into the use table? Then am I talking about all of the zone districts in the county and whether it's allowed or prohibited? And as for now, we're keeping this very narrow in this context of rural remote and then adding in the TR1 and TR2 zone districts. So I think that's kind of the short version of all that was in your packet.
I'm just trying to pull up a map on the
Sorry,
county GIS
I
of the,
realized I meant
just for
to
TR1,
do
TR2,
that.
because I don't know, I'm not really familiar with those zone districts and be nice to know where they are,
Actually,
what
well,
they're.
here, I guess I could jump on Zoom and put it on the screen for you.
What would the next logical zone district be in terms of restrictions?
After
Next.
those two?
AR10, yeah, where would you go? So in other words, where are we having continued friction?
So
That someone placed a hotel, if you will, next to a 10-acre zone district or.
I would, so when I looked at all of our zone districts, I
Yeah.
wasn't delving into residential because basically
Yeah,
the STR code says it's a residential use, it's a different use of a residence.
right.
So I wasn't going there, but I was looking, there are lots of other zone districts that are commercial zone districts or, like a B1 or a B2, which is like, the Aspen Village gas, again, there were places where I was like, clearly this
Yeah.
doesn't make sense, but again, I was not going down the road of thinking about, all of the other residential zone districts and whether or not that's,
I was just, it was a
Yeah.
scope, it was a scope,
Yeah.
it was a scope
It-
question of like,
it's,
are we gonna do this every couple of weeks where we just say, oh, there's one more zone district? It's just like TR1, TR2, and we should be including AR10.
Well, I think after, the whole reason we got into this is, right, the rural and remote zone district is completely different than any of the other zone districts, and its intent was completely different. And it's in a rural backcountry zone, so that taking it to another zoning district after this would be a big jump, might be a stretch, or, it doesn't follow the same natural intent of why we don't allow short-term rentals on the backside of Aspen Mountain in like an 800-foot cabin back in the middle of nowhere, because that's not the whole reason why that zone district was designed like that. And we were getting, there were stories of people having Airbnbs on the backside of Aspen Mountain and people getting lost on snowmobiles, driving around in circles and ending up at the sun deck and saying they're trying to find their VRBO, and that's, starts to become a issue for mountain rescue.
Does Hignell Stark apply to this change in land use code?
I'm sorry,
Hignell Stark.
I'm not familiar with this.
Infamous STR legislation.
I don't know.
Basically said that the prohibition of an STR is not a take.
Oh,
Is not a take.
taking.
So it's not your, it's a privilege, not a right to actually.
That's how the county's always treated it. Historically, so, I don't know. I'm not familiar with exactly what you're referring to, but I'm happy to look at it. But that is not how the Colorado courts have looked at it, at least.
I'm getting close to sharing.
So at the growth committee, we talked a lot about rural and remote, and then the next areas and how we were gonna. And I don't remember whether it was a zone district or if it was defined in another way.
It's an interesting case.
There were areas that
It's
were
applicable.
like contiguous, let's talk about Capitol Creek or Snowmass Creek or those areas, and are those considered zone? There was a lot of discussion about how to regulate that's the right word, you know, usage back there. And I don't know if they were defined as zone districts or if they were defined in some other way. Capitol Creek and Stone Creek are perfect examples, Lanedo, they're not rural or remote,
Right.
but they're not really appropriate in our opinion for short-term rentals.
Right.
Those aren't zone districts, those are,
Well, like some of Lanedo is rural remote, and then you move down the valley into Lanedo in a little bit, and it becomes what AR.
So there's,
Right, a lot of those were, it was the
Yeah.
half mile off of,
Yeah.
you know, winter maintained road, that was
Yep.
the original rural remote criteria, so right, like. Lanedo by the road is not, but so, yeah, I think, you know, the growth committee, right, clearly there's going to be, I think, more conversation and discussion about STRs and where it may or may not be appropriate, basically coming from those recommendations from the growth committee. Right, are there different overlay, you know? I
it was
mean,
an
there
overlay of
it's-
some sort, I don't think
Right,
it
it
was
was-
a zoning overlay.
But it was right, it was, you know, looking at an overlay type concept.
Right.
Right now, we have overlays that are more specific
That's what it
to
was.
caucus areas, but like there, it's more. You know, right, where are those lines, and at what point do you cross over? So I don't think it's as straightforward as, right, all of the AR 10 zone district.
Right.
Yeah, no,
You
it's-
know, I mean,
Right,
that's,
yeah, so,
right.
It was,
But-
but again, your preamble was, we're preempting the preemptors. Is there anything else we should be doing today, given, you know, legislation's about to start, and I'm sure we already have a list of bills that you guys already, you know, focused on, so should it go beyond what's currently there, or what you just had a couple hours ago at first read?
I couldn't tell you, you know, legislatively, I mean, I know basically the concern that had come up last spring.
Yeah.
Is the one we're still addressing, thinking that's gonna come back around in some form.
Sure, and I think that legislation was targeted largely within the framework of the licensing authority granted to counties
Right.
and did not necessarily attempt to legislate in the realm of local government control over land use authority. And maybe that's coming, it's hard to say.
Right.
And that
It's scary.
is either scary or subject to different arguments to challenge that potentially, so.
And it was sort of specific to like recreational cabins, kind of off-grid, not served by, you know,
Right.
what, you know, well, wet water stuff, you know, whatever.
Fire
It was kind of
services.
Getting, you
yeah.
know, so again, the things they were putting with that looked a lot like our rural remote zone district.
Right,
And, you know,
okay.
again, these areas that we're trying to protect.
Yeah.
So,
Can I ask a question? So you're gonna try and take it away from the county and put it in a land use code? The
it's
rule?
still in the short-term rental code
Okay,
as well. It's already in the short-term rental code. The BOCC adopted that last year in 2023. So we're just taking that and basically also putting it in the land use code.
well, I think you're doing a great job because I am a realtor and I have something in the city and something in the county. And I follow all the rules and I'm grateful because all of you have been wonderful in helping me understand, you know, the meaning and why, and I think you're doing a great job and I hope it stays the way it is.
Do you mind stating your name for the record? Sorry.
Amy Motier.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're just trying to get some consistency between what's in the county code. And the land use code is part of the county code, of course, but they're not necessarily inconsistent with each other right now, but we're trying to align the uses in the rural remote zone district, which is with what is already prohibited in that area of the county by a different provision of the code, so we're trying to match those up.
Makes sense.
And to show, I mean, I think.
Yeah, I can see
specifically,
TR
here's
two.
TR2 is basically, this is smuggler.
Yep.
Over here. And then TR1 is this little sort of arrowhead looking thing over on that Shadow Mountain. So you can see here's where it abuts rural remote. And same with the TR2, basically, as you go farther up, you know, here's the platform on Smuggler up here.
Yeah,
You're abutting rural remote up here. So this was a transition zone. And same here, this, yeah, over on this side, you know, obviously that's the ski area.
So those houses that are built over by the golf, excuse me, the ice rink over there, that's not part of TR1, that's local.
No, that's in the city.
TR1 is more, Little Cloud. or
Yeah,
above
it's
Little Cloud.
basically, yeah, it's basically right above the
above
the
that.
toe of the slope.
Right,
Yeah, yeah.
it's, the trail over there,
Mhm.
Little Cloud.
Little Cloud,
Yeah.
Little Cloud,
Yeah.
yeah. Subdivision is Little Cloud too, though, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. And so a lot of that Little Cloud Trail is not public, it's privately owned mining claims or something.
Yeah,
But.
Isn't it
undeveloped.
avalanche kind of there?
yeah, it's
Yeah,
pretty
it's
steep.
undeveloped, pretty
Yeah.
undeveloped.
And all those lots on Smuggler, by the shape of them, a lot of those look like mining claims as well.
Yeah, a lot of that, and a lot of that is, I mean, some of that's city
Yeah.
county ownership, some is still private. Basically like this is the mine property.
Yep.
The AR-10 piece of the Smuggler mine property.
Right.
Yeah, those two districts do seem like a natural sort of link to the rural and remote.
Suzanne, is there currently any residential development in TR2 or TR1 that you know about?
Not I don't think so.
I can't think of it.
No, I think, well, actually, no, I should, some of these ones, so up here on the top of Spruce Street
Right,
were
very end.
rezoned after they were developed and or had development approvals.
got it.
So they were at the larger size, but other than those, and I'm just wondering if maybe on the bottom of Lower Smuggler, if that caught any of those properties. But nobody's come in under TR1 or TR2 to develop since those were zoned, and that goes back a ways. I'm thinking mid 2000s.
That big piece above the Smuggler Road that's AR-10. Is that? Seems to be. Is that owned by,
So that's the
Or
The mine, yeah.
I mean, the USFS.
You mean to the right over there?
To the right of it, it was on the map as AR-10, it was all forest.
I guess, again, my question was, in light of the fact we also approved ski rack. And we were concerned about cabins on Ajax, like, is there anything else we need to do at this point in time?
Yeah.
Given we're updating land use code. To further protect lights from shooting up on.
So the way, so ski rec doesn't allow. Single family residences
Right.
aren't allowed, you know, it would only be if it was associated with affordable housing.
Right.
Somehow, you know, I think there's some connection
Right.
there. And again, the short-term rentals are, it's basically, it's a residential use. I mean,
Right.
the use is residential. It's just a different, you know,
Yeah.
so that, I mean, again, that's kind of how the STR code was. When I looked at like, oh, where would this live in use
Right.
tables and thinking, I'm like, well, really, it's your residential use that can be, you know, this is an option for it. It's not treated under the STR code as a separate, like lodging type of use, like where we have hotel,
Right.
motel, et cetera. So again, that's kind of when I was like, we need to keep this narrow
Yeah,
But
for
it's-
now, but I think, you know, right, there's clearly sort of a consideration as you start to go, you know, right, what are all the zone districts and the types of uses and, right, it's a much broader
Well, I mean,
That's not this,
approach to this.
it's not solving Will,
to-
Texas. and-
Right, no,
That's
it's
the
not,
other-
it's not, no, it's not, I won't say solving, it's not addressing
Right,
any of
sorry,
any of
thank you.
that, yeah. You know, right, we do have several campus areas that would like to have said in their master plans. You know, that maybe they don't want any short-term rentals. Yeah, so, right, I mean, there are other considerations, but that's part of the I think, much bigger conversation.
That's not tonight.
Well, yeah, I mean, but didn't we see in the Pandora application, which would be ski rec
Yeah.
for short-term
It was.
cabins by Ruthie's, right? And so that's a
They're in
good,
they're in a ski zone district,
right,
so ski huts are allowed.
okay,
And they were proposing it under that provision, so those are excluded, again, even under our tourist accommodations definition. Like, those are a different.
what's the difference between a ski hut and like if I rent a ski hut on the mountain for one night, or if I rent
Kevin and Will.
yeah,
Well, I think the difference would be that the use in the ski rec zone district would have to be approved in the master plan by the BOCC, which they have declined to do.
okay,
And it's a
But-
tourist accommodation unit at that
Right,
point. I mean,
right.
again, it's that, I guess that's where I'm differentiating
Mhm.
between something that's primarily residential
right,
versus something that is intended
Made
for
for-
a lodging. need.
gotcha.
Correct. And the precedent the BOCC has set up, at least with respect to when they approved Pandora, was if you're annexing new property into the ski rec zone district, that there would be a covenant, I believe, placed on that property to prohibit any sort of residential use in that location. Whether that happens again in the future, I don't know. So. But I guess that would be the distinction that I see between those things right now.
All the houses that were built before it was rezoned are gonna be considered non-conforming with regards to this.
Correct.
I see.
But I don't believe there are any properties in, in rural remote or TR1 or TR2 that are currently lawfully operating short-term rentals, so. There wouldn't be any legal non-conforming use going forward from here.
So to the chair, would you accept the resolution at this point?
I would accept it.
So I would offer, so I know everyone wants to get home and see Vance and Waltz. Doesn't it sound like just like a boxing match? Or a dance?
I know, I said that.
Right? Vance and Waltz. So at this point, I'd like to make a resolution of the Planning and Zoning Commission of Pitkin County, Colorado, recommending approval to the Board of County Commissioners who met on the same subject, a couple floors down earlier today. Pitkin County, Colorado, the following text zoning amendments and certifying the zoning plan to the Board of County Commissioners for consideration. Text zoning amendments to the 2006 Pitkin County Land Use Code, Title 8 of the Pitkin County Land Use Code regarding short-term rentals specifically. Amending Chapter 3, Section 34020, RR Rural and Remote Zone District, Section 34060, TR1 Transitional Residential 1, and Section 34070, TR2 Transitional Residential 2, amending, and finally amending Chapter 11 definition.
I'd entertain that motion. Do I have a second?
Second,
Second from Jasmine. Any further comment from any commissioners before we vote? Okay, I'm gonna call a vote on Jeffrey's motion for the land use code text rezoning amendments for short-term rentals in rural and remote and TR1 and TR2 districts. Doug,
Yes.
Jeffrey,
And updates to Chapter 11, yes.
and updates to Chapter 11. Jasmine?
yes.
Yes, and I vote yes. So that passes unanimously. Great. Do we have any further public comment on the short-term rental before I
Where you're coming.
ask for a motion to adjourn? Do we have anything else?
No, all good.
Vance and Waltz.
So moved. Motion to adjourn. Jeffrey, second. All right, great. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Sure, thank you. This is always rather interesting.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Well,
Sorry
it's-
about that little
it's-
hiccup.
No, that's all
I
right.
gotta, this is the third time it's done it to me. I
Just
gotta,
this room.
no, it did downstairs in the VOCC.
Yeah.
So-
Things.
I don't know what's going on. I'm gonna have to reach out to
Yeah.
IT and see
Yeah,
if
it's
I.
kind of complex, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
different interests and trying to balance what everybody's thinking about.
In Spain.